Welcome to another slow drift through time. Tonight, we're wandering back to the Middle Ages, a world of stone walls, candlelight, and slow bells echoing through misty mornings. The kind of world where time itself seemed to move more gently. This isn't a tale of kings and battles. It's the quiet side of history. The corners often forgotten, the strange stories tucked inside monasteries and convents. Our first story begins not with a queen or a knight, but with a nun, a woman who lived behind walls of silence and prayer, and somehow became known as one of history's worst nuns. Her name was Benedetta Carlini. Picture Italy in the early 1600s, still deeply medieval in spirit. The world outside is full of plague, war, and superstition. Inside the convent of the Mother of God in the town of Pescia, life moves quietly. The nuns wake before sunrise, pray for hours, eat in silence, and rarely speak. But inside Sister Benedetta's mind, something very different was happening. From a young age, Benedetta claimed to see visions, angels, saints, and sometimes dark figures she said were demons. Her sisters in the convent began to whisper that she was special, maybe even chosen by God. Soon, she was made abbess, the leader of the convent, at only 30 years old. But that's when things began to unravel. She claimed that during her trances, angels entered her body and spoke through her. At times, she said she was possessed by Jesus himself, who used her to deliver messages. The church was fascinated, then concerned. Was she holy or deceived? And then came the secret that made her infamous. When an investigation began, another nun confessed that Benedetta had been less than saintly. The two women had shared an intimate relationship, hidden beneath the vows of chastity and silence. To the investigators, it was unthinkable. They called it heresy, witchcraft, and possession. Benedetta was stripped of her title and locked away in isolation for 35 years. Her story might sound scandalous, but beneath it, you can hear the quiet ache of human loneliness. A woman born in a world where emotion, passion, and thought were all caged by rules. She was called the worst nun, but perhaps she was simply too human for the world she lived in. Let's pause here and imagine that silent cell, a small window, a single candle, a woman who once thought angels spoke to her, now speaking only to the walls. Outside her story, thousands of nuns lived lives that were the opposite of scandal. They woke at dawn, wrapped themselves in simple wool robes, and walked barefoot to the chapel. The day was divided by bells, one for prayer, one for work, one for rest. In some convents, they weren't allowed to speak at all, except during prayer. Imagine an entire lifetime of whispering. Meals were humble: bread, thin soup, sometimes cheese. And yet, many wrote that they were content. They felt closer to God in silence than in speech. Every corner of a convent had a meaning. The cloister, the quiet courtyard, symbolized paradise on earth. The garden was planted with herbs used for medicine and food. The chapel was the heart of everything, glowing faintly from the light of oil lamps. At night, before sleeping, nuns would lie on straw mattresses and murmur psalms in the dark. They truly believed angels were watching. It was a slow, simple existence, but not always peaceful. The world outside still found its way in, through politics, through gossip, and through temptation. Some sisters secretly wrote poems and stories. Others tended the sick or copied manuscripts, becoming silent keepers of knowledge while the rest of the world burned books and fought wars. And somewhere among them might have been a young woman dreaming of freedom, even as she whispered her prayers. The medieval monastery was a world apart, and within that world were rules and rituals that seem almost dreamlike now. For example, there were rules about laughter. Yes, laughter. In some abbeys, laughing too loudly was seen as losing control of the soul. Monks and nuns were told to smile softly, but never laugh out loud. Some monasteries had a silence stone, a small piece of marble you had to carry if you broke silence. It was a public reminder that words had weight. And then there were the strange little daily habits. Writing on wax tablets instead of paper to avoid waste. Raising bees for wax candles. And teaching orphan children how to read Latin hymns before they could read their own names. The rhythm of life was steady. So steady it could lull anyone into calm. Maybe that's why we find it so hypnotic now. A world where nothing happened quickly, where patience was prayer. In the wider medieval world, faith and superstition danced together like candlelight and shadow. Every monastery guarded relics, bones of saints, fragments of the true cross, vials of mysterious holy blood. People walked hundreds of miles to see them. One convent claimed to have a feather from the angel Gabriel's wing. Another displayed a tear from the Virgin Mary, carefully preserved in a glass vial. Whether real or imagined, these relics gave people hope. Pilgrims slept outside monastery walls, whispering prayers through the night. If they were lucky, they might hear the monks singing matins, a deep, echoing chant rising in the dark, sound waves of faith that seemed to reach heaven itself. And sometimes, miracles were reported. A blind man seeing light again, a crippled child walking. Even skeptics couldn't fully deny the air of mystery. For people who lived through famine and plague, miracles were not absurd. They were necessary. They were proof that God still walked the earth, quietly, among them. Not all stories from the medieval church were solemn. Some were quietly ridiculous and somehow endearing. There was Brother Stephen, a monk in England, who recorded in his diary that a rooster challenged him every dawn. One morning, tired of losing sleep, he fought the rooster with a broom and declared victory in the name of Saint Benedict. He was later reprimanded for anger unbecoming of a monk. Or the nun, Sister Margaret, who reportedly levitated during prayer. Her sisters described her floating above the floor, eyes closed, hands raised. The bishop, who came to investigate, simply wrote, "Her holiness is great, though inconvenient at mealtimes." Then there was Saint Francis of Assisi, not a monk or nun, but a hermit who preached to animals. He once delivered an entire sermon to a field of birds. Witnesses said they listened quietly until he finished, then flew away in perfect unison. Maybe it's a legend, maybe not, but it's beautiful either way. What did they do all day, these quiet souls behind stone walls? They wrote, they sewed, they gardened, and above all, they waited. Waited for prayer hours, waited for letters from distant families, waited for heaven. Time in a convent was circular, not linear. Each day mirrored the last, like waves returning to the same shore. And in that repetition, they found meaning. One anonymous nun wrote, "We polish the floor each morning. By night, it is dusty again. So we polish the soul each day with prayer, knowing it will never stay clean for long." There's something profoundly human in that, the acceptance that perfection is a task never finished. When storm struck, nuns huddled in the chapel, chanting psalms as thunder rolled through the sky. When plagues came, they tended the sick until they themselves fell ill. Many died unknown, their names erased by time. But their quiet endurance built the foundations of hospitals, schools, and libraries we still have today. If you think about it, silence was their language. Silence could mean obedience, or rebellion, or deep, wordless peace. When Sister Benedetta's story became scandal, her downfall wasn't caused just by her visions, but by her breaking of silence. She spoke too much. She imagined too loudly. And yet silence can also protect. For every forbidden love, there were 100 secrets kept out of compassion. For every rule broken, a quiet forgiveness. Perhaps that's why these old convents feel peaceful even now. The walls have absorbed centuries of whispered prayers and gentle regrets. If you walk into one today, you could almost hear it. The faint echo of footsteps on stone, the sound of a quill scratching against parchment, and the far-off bell calling the faithful to the next hour of devotion. There was the monk who tried to build a flying machine from parchment and feathers. He leapt from the tower of his abbey and broke both legs. When asked why, he replied calmly, "The design is sound, only faith was too light." And the nun who refused to eat anything but communion wafers, believing that living only on the body of Christ made her holier. Historians now call it holy anorexia. Another monk spent 40 years illuminating a single Bible by hand, each letter painted with gold and blue pigment crushed from lapis lazuli. When he finished, he wrote one last line at the end. "Finished, though not perfect, as man himself is not perfect." For all their rules, their strictness, their devotion, monks and nuns were still people. They laughed, they cried, they made mistakes. A convent might look serene, but it was also full of personalities. The strict abbess, the daydreaming novice, the elderly sister who dozed during prayer, the one who secretly fed stray cats behind the kitchen. They lived close together for decades, sharing everything. Friendships formed that were deeper than family ties. When one sister died, the others sang over her body through the night so her soul would not be afraid. In a world of violence, they chose peace. In a time of ignorance, they preserved knowledge. And in a life of silence, they found a kind of music. As we drift toward the end of this night's story, imagine the flicker of candlelight fading slowly against stone walls. The convent bell tolls softly in the distance. Outside, an owl calls once, then disappears into the dark. History, at its heart, is not just a list of dates. It's the sum of quiet lives, the forgotten souls who prayed, doubted, and dreamed just like we do. Sister Benedetta, the so-called worst nun, was not a monster but a mirror. She showed us what happens when faith collides with desire. when silence breaks into confession, when a human heart beats too loudly behind holy walls. Maybe that's why her story still lingers, because it feels strangely modern. We all live between devotion and doubt. We all want to believe, and yet we crave something real. So as you close your eyes tonight, think of the candle burning in that distant cell. Think of the chants echoing in cold halls. Think of the peace that comes from quiet work, patient hands, and slow, steady faith. And, if you listen closely, you might still hear the whisper of old prayers floating through time, soft as breath, gentle as sleep. Good night. If you enjoyed drifting through tonight's quiet history, take a slow breath and remember to like, comment, or subscribe, not for the algorithm, but so you can find your way back here the next time you need a peaceful story. Sleep well. Until next time, good night from history.